With how monumental an occasion Smash Bros. Has become, for better or worse, there are all kinds of character requests and support groups, driven by all kinds of motivations. Some just want to see their favorites join the fight, others want to gather as many big names as possible, others still are hoping to be surprised with someone new and fascinating they'd never thought of before. And it even extends beyond characters, to stages, spirits, items, even just franchises in general. But there's one word that gets thrown around an awful lot during newcomer speculation, one that, I think, gets misused. Representation. On paper, it seems benign enough, right? Why wouldn't you want to see new stuff get represented in Smash? I mean, we've even had past examples of characters chosen because they could do things that we hadn't seen on the roster before. But when it stops becoming about that, and turns into people using Smash to play judge or even gatekeeper, and not the good kind, that we start seeing problems. While it's nice and all to want to rep new things, I've seen discussion get dicey when arguments start flying that say a character or costume or series needs to happen in Smash for the sake of representing them. As if who they are or what they could offer matters less than what they can rep, like they're just a means to an end. I mean, if you've been around this fandom for long enough, and you've seen it, right? Arguments that we need a rep for an underutilized element or type of weapon, or to give another rep to a series the speaker thinks doesn't have enough, or even that we need a certain character just so the roster represents a certain type of game. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying such character support bases only care about representation. There are all kinds of reasons motivating any significant support base, and the reasoning varies from person to person. Even I was interested in set tile back in the day. It's just that when it becomes less about the characters themselves and more about wielding them as a blunt object to correct some perceived imbalance, that debates in this fandom take a turn for the toxic. Which isn't helped by the way the Smash community has this bad habit of treating the roster like a measuring stick of who matters and who doesn't, when that isn't what it's intended to be. I just think we're best off approaching this whole deal as the nuanced topic it is, instead of trying to make it all about just one criterion, whether that be repping something or anything else. Because there can be some really cool things that get overlooked when the community tunnel visions like that, even among whichever character's discourse is favoring at the moment. And that brings us to our challenger. Someone whose natural element is one that many people have actually argued needs more representation. But there's much more to them than that. And if handled just right, they'd also feel completely unique and exciting on their own terms. Only fitting for a species that marches to the beat of its own drum. Rillaboom! Rillaboom is the fully evolved form of Grookey, the grass-type starter of the Galar region in Pokémon Sword and Shield. In addition to the expected plant-based powers, this line is gifted with innate musical talents, fashioning drumsticks and eventually full-on drums out of wood to use for both performance and combat by playing rhythms to grow and manipulate plants. Despite the fearsome appearance, your typical Rillaboom is actually pretty laid back and peaceful by nature the way real-life gorillas are, preferring to settle disputes between family or teammates without aggression unless it becomes absolutely necessary. Groups in the wild are said to be led not by the physically strongest, but by whomever among them is the most skilled musician. While a new Pokemon generation is a very safe thing to pull a Smash newcomer from, to where some people expected a Gen 8 newcomer to show up in the base game before Sword and Shield were even officially announced, the current situation is complicated discussion. The new games have seen a steady stream of controversy since E3 back in June, starting with the decision to leave a little over half the national decks on the bench for the start of Gen 8. Combined with significantly less news before launch than previous generations, which made smoothing things over much more difficult, a PR department with a knack for sticking its foot in its mouth, and even some hostility from fans in places due to the first new generation on a main console merely having an open-world central section instead of being a massive, seamless, open-ended adventure, even though the latter was never actually promised, and we started seeing some very vocal backlash and even conspiracies accusing the developers of phoning it in. While that's a mess of a topic best served for some other time, I've seen some people wonder if Sakurai might not want to touch Sword and Shield because of the controversies. And, well, I don't buy it. That kind of thing's never stopped him before, so I figure it wouldn't be a deal breaker for anyone from Gen 8. Though another potential hang-up is the recent Spirit event celebrating Sword and Shield's launch, adding spirits of the starters, main legendaries, and a couple other notables. And while Rillaboom itself may not be one of the spirits, its Prevo is. Since we haven't had any characters make the jump yet from spirit to playable, it's raised questions. And that's the thing, We don't know if being a spirit makes a character ineligible to become a full-fledged fighter. The situation simply hasn't come up yet, since Piranha Plant's development was mostly finished by Ultimate's release date, meaning the base game spirit list might have been made with its existence in mind, and the rest of DLC so far has come from games that weren't previously present in Smash. This makes it difficult to know if spirits are fair game or not. Personally, I think what this probably tells us is that a Gen 8 character wasn't planned yet at whatever point this spirit event was planned out, however far back that was. Maybe when they decided who the first couple post-Fighters Pass characters would be, it was still far enough away from Sword and Shield's launch that they decided to wait. Remember, past Pokemon newcomers and even Corrin were chosen close to their games' respective launch dates. For all we know, this event might have been planned before they ever decided to make a Season 2 happen. So while things aren't looking good in the short term, I think Gen 8 will potentially be fair game starting with the second batch of Season 2 newcomers, Fighter number 8 or number 9 or something like that. So why Rillaboom in particular? Well, we don't have a clear frontrunner from Sword and Shield yet, and so I want to look at a few different options over time and not just one. And I think it's worth addressing this character first, since I figure as soon as we get a whiff of anything implying Gen 8 is possible, there will be people wanting a grass-type rep who isn't tethered to the Pokemon Trainer's 3-in-1 gimmick. Which misses the point, you know? Bringing in a standalone grass type just so we can say we have one feels like it makes this about identity and surface-level traits only, when we know Sakurai usually cares about more than that. Which is why it's a good thing that there's more worth talking about here than just what this character could represent. While having just one character so far with plant-based powers doesn't mean we need another to balance out all the fire users or anything, it does mean that a character who does new things with the element would have an easy time feeling interesting and standing out, which just so happens to be something this character can certainly manage. But let's see just why this character could stand out. If everything played out just right, what would Rillaboom be like in Smash? How could both the plant-based and music-based abilities on offer here be combined into something wholly compelling? Rillaboom's basic design is an easy lift straight from Sword and Shield with no real alterations needed. Standing upright with his hands free by default, he'd pull wooden drumsticks out of hammer space when needed, or maybe keep them in that mop of hair, whichever works best, and then carry his drum on his back until he needs it, which is actually a thing in the games, bet you didn't know that. We want Rillaboom's animations to reflect the whole musician angle since it helps us emphasize the personality here, and also make it easier to feel distinct next to DK since we don't want a second gorilla that feels redundant next to the first, you know? I'm thinking something like a recurring motif where a lot of his animations have a deliberate rhythm to them, as if he's keeping a beat going in his head, which is also a thing that shows up in the games. His default standing animation could be a direct pull from what you see here, but just without having the drum and sticks out, having him rock back and forth, shifting his weight from one foot to the other in tempo. Could even be taken further with an idle animation where he closes his eyes and nods to the beat for a couple seconds. For alternate palettes, the first place to pull from would be nature itself, and I could see a handful of alts based on those kinds of natural colors. Since his hair is made out of foliage, I think we want to keep the colors more or less natural for whichever palettes are based on real-life nature. Then we could add an alt or two inspired by other Pokemon with more dynamic palettes, maybe a red and white one based on a fellow Simian starter, or something based on the Monkey Trio from Gen 5. Maybe we could even see an obligatory Yeti alt like what DK got, complete with a pale blue for the leaves to make them look like they're covered in snow. There's also the shiny palette as an option, which doesn't look half bad, but Smash has been inconsistent about using those, so your guess is as good as mine if it show up. And if they really wanted to go all out, they could even have each alt change the color of the drum and drumsticks. Up next, Rillaboom's stats and other attributes should work with the species' lore and feel big and imposing, but only hostile when the other guy starts it. The playstyle I have in mind is a natural extension of that. With an emphasis on waiting for opponents to get aggressive and then hitting them hard for overextending, Rillaboom would bring an unusually laid-back fighting style for a big guy. This even affects how his neutral functions, with a focus on applying passive pressure that makes opponents approach you and play by your rules. If done right, he actually wouldn't give a damn about campier opponents, with ways to strongly encourage them to knock it off and fight mano-a-mano. Once your opponent is approached, Rillaboom's kit would use hard-hitting attacks and a few disjointed hitboxes to exchange blows and lay the smack down when the opportunity arises. His punishes would specifically lean towards soft reading when the enemy will pick a bad option and throwing out something that overpowers it, which is a bit different from other bait-heavy styles that focus on punishing whiffed attacks or on blocking and retaliating out of shield. Punishing someone for picking a bad option is more difficult to do, and so Rillaboom's moveset also has an unusual amount of good mix-ups to make it easier, giving you more freedom in what you can use in a given situation and greater reward when your mix-ups work. Of course a character with the music motifs would encourage being creative, right? Getting into the actual numbers, Rillaboom would be as big and heavy as you'd expect. This is actually the first time I've done a concept for a heavyweight since way back near the start of this series. Measuring in at slightly smaller than DK and a fair bit lighter, Rillaboom would still be the 8th heaviest character on the current roster, which is saying something considering how many heavyweights Ultimate has already added. Yet Rillaboom is actually deceptively agile for something so big and bulky. A surprisingly decent 85 base speed in the games would transfer over into Smash with not half bad a mobility on all accounts. Being able to get around with average proficiency means he wouldn't be quite as easy to pin down or run away from as you'd expect. And that high 125 base attack would also get put to use. Boasting both hard-hitting attacks and strong KO power, Rillaboom would really put the hurt on when his attacks are hitting. But with a pretty small set of true combos, racking up damage would be more about maintaining your advantage state and using your variety of tools to keep your opponents guessing. I'd have there be a handful of almost true confirms to further emphasize fighting with creativity and being unpredictable with your follow-ups. While that recovery stat looks good on paper, thanks to alright airspeed and a recovery move that goes pretty far, more details on that later. In practice it's a bit more complicated and that number can end up a lot lower if you don't know what you're doing. You'll see what I mean. So what could Rillaboom's actual moveset be like? Let's take a look at how it might end up, because what self-respecting musician doesn't have a repertoire to perform? Starting with the basic stuff, a jab combo consisting of a quick punch, then a rising hook, then whipping out sticks and rapidly drumming on his opponents. Rapid jabs aren't very common on heavies, so this is a decent source of damage if you don't have time for anything else, and I can see a startup of around frame 5 that'd make it fairly fast by big body standards. Rillaboom's forward tilt takes a move from Pokemon proper and interprets it, taking the drumsticks out again and swinging forward with them one at a time. A bit of disjoint on the attacks where the sticks are. The 2 hits would let you stuff out a hasty approach or damage a shield with the first hit and then poke with the second. Maybe it'd even require pressing A once per swing, so you could choose to only do the first hit. For something with more oomph to it, his up tilt has him grab his drum off his back with one hand and swing it overhead. A bit slow for a tilt since he has to pick up the drum first and put it back afterward. They make up for it with damage, a pretty big arc, and even enough knockback to KO at very high percents. Rillaboom's down tilt could pull from a new move in Gen 8 learned early on by the groupie line, crouching down and stabbing forward with one drumstick at ground level. This low poke could sneak under some attacks and trip up opponents attacking with landing aerials or stuff like that. Maybe it could lead into a combo or two at low percents, but not for very long. Wrapping up this set, I kept things simple for the dash attack. A shoulder tackle gets the job done and fits Rillaboom's build, and we could even make it deceptively quick and strong to give it use as a burst option, albeit one with a lot of end lag, so don't get predictable with it. How about some smash attacks next? And here's where things get interesting. With the line's abilities on full display, Rillaboom's forward smash would involve slamming his drum down and pounding on it with both hands, creating a column of wind and leaves that launches opponents away. While slow to come out and unsafe as hell, it'd have a big hitbox, tall enough to reach the battlefield side platforms I imagine, which would make it perfect for when you get a hard read. For the up smash, let's take a similar concept and put it overhead instead. Holding the drum with one hand and pounding on it with the other, this time it'd create an explosion of green energy that'd send opponents flying and scatter leaves in the air for a little extra visual flair. With a circular hitbox on this one that sits mostly above you, it'd be one hell of an anti-air option that'd destroy attempts to use falling aerials to land, but it wouldn't do much against grounded opponents due to the lack of an initial launcher hitbox. Rounding out the set, Rillaboom's down smash would have him pound on the drum 3 times, creating a shockwave of sound with each impact. The first 2 hits would link into the third, and with very little downtime between each hit, it'd be a dangerous option for tech chases or ledge pressure that'd wake people up for sure. But since it lasts so long, you're a sitting duck if you whiff it, so don't. If you notice, all 3 of these smash attacks have pretty big disjointed hitboxes. This makes them ideal for calling out aggressive options and scoring early KOs. And having him strike the drum with his fists instead of sticks for these particular moves helps emphasize their power. Let's take to the air next. Rillaboom's neutral air can have him swing both arms outward, elbow first. It'd have decent startup and be good for covering yourself in air-to-air situations, but since it only hit on the sides it wouldn't protect above or below you. And it'd have enough end lag to make it not combo into anything. Purely defensive this one. If you want more offense though, then use his forward air instead. A diagonally downward arm swing to swat opponents away. It'd be a nice damage dealer with a big hitbox that'd be good for ending low percent combos, but it wouldn't spike, so you'd have to rely on something else for that. And by something else, I mean Rillaboom's back air, a unique looking move that taps into that inner sense of rhythm, raising one arm up behind him on one beat and pounding straight down on the next. Joining a rare club of characters whose back air can spike, it'd be pretty slow to come out since it'd only have a hit on the hammering part, but with devastating power if you can land it. For something a little less reckless but with the same flair, let's make Rillaboom's up air a headbang motion. Compared to the other headbutt up airs out there, it'd be slower startup-wise but cover a bigger arc and start out further back. Not the best at comboing, but better at juggling. Rounding off the air game, Rillaboom's down air could follow his inner rhythm once again with a 1-2 kick that follows the beat. Pretty quick for a down air at frame 9 or 10, and more active than most due to 2 hits that link into each other. It'd have utility in a spot usually reserved for riskier attacks. But just like the forward air, it also can't spike, and it'd have enough end lag that it wouldn't auto-cancel if used out of a short hop. Rillaboom's grab game continues the trend of typical looking stuff with some personal flair thrown in. Some pretty standard grabs would give way to a grappling animation where he rocks back and forth faster than before, speeding up his inner tempo to suit the situation. His pummel has him swat his opponent with his free hand while he keeps moving to that rhythm, with the timing of it set up so the optimal input for multiple pummels would be exactly on every second beat. Then for throws, an uppercut forward throw to provide some chin music, a back throw where he spins around once and flings the enemy away, dealing 12% damage as his strongest throw with even the ability to KO if done at the ledge at higher percents, an upward toss for his up throw, and slamming them into the ground for his down throw in a way that bounces them forward and combos into a dash attack or forward air until mid percents. Finally, I have a couple ideas for taunts, like one based on an idle animation from Sword and Shield where he hypes up an invisible crowd, or an original one where he beat his chest like a stereotypical gorilla, except instead of just making noise, he'd play a short rhythm instead. And now for the main event. I've gone light on the plant powers so far, but Rillaboom's specials are where this character's latent abilities take center stage. And first, what better to have it neutral than the line's signature move? Drum beating uses music to extend roots from Rillaboom's wooden drum and control them to strike an enemy, dealing moderately high damage and debuffing their speed. For our own take on it in Smash, pressing B once would begin a charging animation as Rillaboom whips out his drum and sticks and gathers energy into the drum, with a drum roll of course. Like several other neutral specials, you'd be able to store the charge, which makes the drum glow a faint green if it's charged all the way, and activate it somewhere else, which is good, because this move works a little differently depending on whether you're grounded or not. If you're planted on terra firma, or a platform, releasing the charge causes roots to sprout out of the drum and shoot out forward at ground level in a helix formation to a max length of half a final destination, or, less than that at less than full charge. But if you do it in midair, the drum flips over halfway and the roots come out straight down instead, reaching nearly as far down as the height of Battlefield's center platform. Both versions are multi-hit attacks that rack up damage, but they don't combo into anything, and the midair version doesn't spike and put you into freefall afterward. A disjointed attack with a lot of versatility that can punish overcommitments in mid-range, pressure ledge get-ups, harass recoveries that ride up the sides of the stage, or punish an overzealous juggle attempt in a pinch. Drum beating grants a surprising amount of creativity from a single move, as long as, you're smart about when you use it, since the grounded version would be easy to jump in over and the aerial version would be weaker in comparison and have a ton of end lag. But if you thought that was interesting, you ain't seen nothing yet. Nature Power's a weird one in its home series, turning into one of several different moves based on where the battle is taking place. An interesting premise on its own, I took it and ad-libbed a little. On use, Rillaboom plays a quick riff on his drum that weaponizes his surroundings into doing one of 3 distinct attacks based on your current position. If you're on the ground or a platform, you'll get the move Seed Bomb, generating a seed immediately ahead that then pops up and explodes at short hop height to catch people jumping in when they shouldn't. If you're in midair, you'll get the move Swift instead, bending non-elemental energy into a ring of star-shaped projectiles that spin around you once at rapid speed for protection. But if you're standing specifically in tall grass, you'll pull the energy from it into a glowing green energy ball and fire it forward, creating a projectile strong enough to destroy weaker ones on contact. Where can you find tall grass? We'll get to that in a bit. An extremely unusual move, Nature Power is basically 3 context-sensitive tools in one. Use them well, and you'll have even more creative potential that truly lets you get into the mindset of a musician. Just remember to keep some stuff in mind, like the swift stars appearing in front of you and one at a time and not comboing into each other, or how Energy Ball destroys the grass you use to power it. The latter's actually really important, as you'll see. we're going to do some improvising of our own for Rillaboom's up special, by taking a famously overpowered move and repurposing it a little. In the games, Boom Burst deals a tremendous amount of damage to anyone nearby, whether they be friend or foe. A move kept only in check by the fact that it's normal type under regular circumstances, and so most lines that learn it have other offensive options that work better. But instead of using it for raw damage or knockback, since a mere 60 base special attack doesn't really allow for that, let's make it a recovery move instead. On use, Rillaboom slows down and hangs in midair like Diddy Kong charging his jetpack, taking out his drum and sticks, raising his hands up, and twirling the sticks around to charge them up. Press B again, and he strikes the drum with enough force to create a blast of sound so strong that the recoil of it launches him in the direction you hold. Higher levels of charge makes you go further faster upon release and makes the sound waves somewhat bigger and stronger. Boom Burst could get you some pretty good distance when charged, but the lack of protective hitbox during the actual movement is quite the drawback. Recovering using this move would be all about mixing up your timing to trip up edgeguard attempts and go around them. In a pinch, it can also be used for edgeguarding itself, but its knockback angle would be more diagonal, and so it would only be good for dealing damage and not ending stocks early. But we have one more major tool in this character's repertoire, and it's one that basically defines his fighting style. And yet, it's something as simple as growing grass. One of a few moves introduced in Gen 6 that alter the ground you're fighting on, Grassy Terrain raises the power of grass-type moves, grants passive healing to anyone in battle touching the ground, and halves the damage of seismic attacks like Earthquake. The Grookey line is one of a small handful who can learn it naturally, and their not yet obtainable hidden ability creates it automatically upon switching in. On use, Rillaboom plays another distinct musical riff on his drum, and if you're standing on the ground or a platform, it generates a platform-sized patch of tall grass around you. The grass could look generic, resemble the tall grass in Sword and Shield proper, or be something more stylized like the grass ring that shows up in most overworld battles in Gen 6. Anyone standing in the grass for long enough is slowly healed, taking about 1 second for it to kick in, healing 2% every second once it's going, and pausing if you put your shield up. In addition, anyone touching the grass cannot be tripped, and any attacks that leave them buried have their bury duration cut in half. This is the focal point of Rillaboom's neutral and the main source of his ability to force approaches. Opponents sitting back and throwing out projectiles mindlessly won't accomplish anything when you can just heal the damage back or wait for the right opening and use nature power to create an energy ball and plow right through their wall. And since the healing is very gradual, and your options for forward range attacks are one that only covers the ground and one that destroys the grass you're standing in, it wouldn't really let you camp so much as discourage your opponents from camping, ideally. Just make sure no one takes control away from you, because the grass can benefit your enemies just as easily. And like with similar moves, you can only create one patch of grass at a time, so you need to pick your location wisely or else you'll have to wait 15 seconds or so for it to go away, or commit to an energy ball to get rid of it and risk being punished. Finally, you can pull from one more mechanic for Rillaboom's final smash. And it's pretty much exactly what you expected. Certain power hotspots in the Galar region allow a Pokemon to Dynamax, temporarily growing to gigantic size and unlocking alternate attacks that shape the very environment around them. Though apparently it's actually more of an energy projection and their true form is still normal size within it, but it's still cool. Using a Smash Ball's power to simulate a power spot, Rillaboom leaps into the background and grows to Dynamax size, hanging in midair and leering over the stage ominously just like Giga Bowser. A drum-shaped reticle appears for you to aim with, and upon pressing a button, or waiting long enough, Rillaboom launches 3 giant glowing green seeds toward that spot in a spread formation that rapidly grow into equally glowing plants and mushrooms and explode for heavy damage and knockback. And as an added bonus, just as Max Overgrowth applies Grassy Terrain in the games, using it in Smash would create 3 patches of grass at the spots the seeds landed. All of this is what Rillaboom could bring to Smash. A grooving gorilla from a nation of knights and heroes whose rocking rhythms bend nature itself to his will. While he lacks the aggressive nature of most of his heavyweight brethren, he compensates by following a beat all his own that grows into a command performance the likes of which the roster has yet to have ever seen. Every part of Rillaboom's moveset works toward a greater hold just like the instruments in an ensemble, built to force opponents to approach and then punish them for overcommitting. With a surprisingly diverse set of attacks for a big body, there's a ton of creative potential at his players' fingertips that allow you to keep your opponents guessing instead of having to hope you can unga-bunga your way to a win. And with the means to heal off chip damage with Grassy Terrain and situationally overpower walls of projectiles with Energy Ball, he's also a rare case of a heavy who doesn't really mind fighting enemy zoners. However, while proficient at forcing approaches, he lacks the tools to wall people out, meaning an entire facet of his kit doesn't help against opponents who want to get up in his face anyway. Many of his best conversions aren't quite true, and his recovery is vulnerable when misused, forcing a reliance on mix-ups and figuring out which options your opponent won't expect in order to truly make both his damage output and survivability work. And when it comes down to it, his best KO options all rely on getting a good read on when your opponent will get aggressive, requiring you to learn your foe's habits on the fly and understand the perfect opportunity to let loose. So, an interesting character overall from a new Pokemon generation that's turned out to have a lot of good designs. And this is far from the only good option for Ultimate Gen 8 has to offer. In fact, I may or may not have a character concept for another coming next. And it's someone with a major role in the games and a lot of potential to offer who hasn't been considered a serious option so far, but probably should be. Be sure to subscribe and click the little notification bell to make sure you don't miss it. While Sword and Shield have been rife with controversy for months now, it seems that there are a lot of people who have still been able to enjoy the games regardless. But what are your thoughts on the new generation as a whole and on the new batch of designs? Any that have become a new favorite of yours? I'm interested to hear your take on it. Special thanks to this video goes to these nice people here, and especially my patrons for their continued support. Check out the video description or wait for the end screen if you're interested in joining them yourself. And so, until next time, I got some 5-star raids to go do. Maybe this time they won't break out of the ball.